respond? Here's what I think.
This is about getting organized, bringing our complaints to the right people.
We need to put together a committee and talk to the government. They don't understand. They don't know what it means to be a mutant.
We need to show them, educate them, let them know that we're here to stay.
Come on. People, you must listen. They won't take us seriously.
They want to exterminate us.
This cure is voluntary. Nobody's talking about extermination.
No one ever talks about it. They just do it. And you go on with your lives, ignoring the signs all around you. And then one day, when the air is still and the night has fallen, they come for you.
Excuse me.
It's only then you realize what you're talking about organizing and committed. The extermination has already begun. Make no mistake, my brothers. They will draw first blood. They will force their cure upon us. The only question is, will you join my brotherhood and fight? Or wait for the inevitable genocide? Who will you stand with, the humans or us?
Social judgment theory is an objective theory developed and created by Musaf Sherif. The theory accounts for how someone's attitude towards something is created. These attitudes are described on a parallel of acceptance, non-committal, or rejection. Ego also plays a part in social judgment theory. Sherif states that depending on how close someone is to a particular topic or subject, will predict where someone's anchor point will fall. An anchor point can be easily described as someone's position. Ultimately, social judgment theory details the cognitive representation of our opinions and why we either accept or reject something. The theory is divided into 5 different principles. Using the clip shown from X-Men 3, we will apply the 5 different principles to the scene.
People, or in this case mutants, have categories of judgment with which they evaluate incoming information. When an individual encounters a situation in which he or she must make a judgment, a range of possible positions can be taken in response. Assuming that the mutants have created categories for their judgments, they would evaluate another's proposed argument. In the clip, this first step would be represented by the dilemma all the mutants face. Some mutants want to destroy humans, who they feel want to destroy them. Others want to coexist with them, and others are undecided. Some clearly have made up their minds and vocally share their position. Obviously, not all the mutants in the hall have made their choice, hence the meeting.
The second principle states that as people evaluate incoming information, they determine the category of judgment or latitude to which it belongs. In the scene, we can clearly see which mutants are accepting, non-committed, or rejecting of the proposed dilemma. Magneto is rejecting of a cure. Andy Dick is accepting, and there are some who have not yet made up their mind, thus non-committal.
The third principle asserts that the size of the latitudes is determined by the level of personal involvement, or ego involvement. The mutants all have some type of involvement with this particular dilemma. We can see in this scene that there are some mutants with dangerous powers, powers that make them stronger than humans. We can infer that a mutant's ego on the issue may be directly related to their strength in power. They reject the notion of curing themselves because their identity and ego are directly attached to their power. Others may view their powers as non-threatening. This may put them in a more accepting category of coexistence.
Principle 4 states that people distort incoming information to fit their categories of judgment. When presented with a persuasive message that falls within the latitude of their acceptance and is close to the individual's anchor, people will assimilate the new point.
In the beginning of this scene, we see Andy Dick preaching about how mutants need to talk to the right people. His anchor point is clearly opposite of some in the crowd. You can hear vocal retorts to some of his message. He is not assimilating many mutants in this way. When Magneto comes on stage, he is clearly more in line with most of the vocal mutants' anchor points.
The fifth principle asserts that optimal persuasion occurs when the discrepancies between the anchor and the advocate positions are small to moderate. There were clearly little discrepancies between some rejecting mutants and Magneto's viewpoints. On the other hand, the accepting viewpoints of Andy Dick were much larger than a small or moderate range. Now that we have a foundation of what social judgment theory is, let's take a more critical perspective of how it's changed over the years. As stated before, Sharif is the creator of social judgment theory. During the 1960s, which was when Sharif had his theory published, was a time of social change in America, much like the social change today. The issue with social judgment theory exists within its inability to adapt to the social masses. The latitudes of acceptance and rejection can offer a simplified model by which someone creates their own acceptance or rejection. However, social judgment theory offers little to explain how a non-committed person may shift in stance to an accepted or rejected latitude. Let's take a look at a social change of acceptance over the last 10 years here in America.
Just after midnight, thousands celebrated what was once just a dream.
Gay couples are tying the knot legally for the first time in Connecticut.
And now, in the past week, both Iowa and Vermont.
Cheers in New Hampshire, where same-sex couples celebrated
The first same-sex couple to legally wed in the nation's capital.
And judges across the state will be opening their doors today.
I'm glad that my parents are getting married.
Big wins for same-sex marriage.
Maine, Maryland, and Washington have become the first states to approve same-sex marriage by popular vote.
This is a historic day for Maryland.
The Defense of Marriage Act was struck down and Proposition 8 effectively invalidated. Again, legalizing same-sex marriage in California.
Rhode Island and Minnesota are the latest states to legalize same-sex marriage.
Same-sex marriages are being recognized in the state of New Jersey.
And Hawaii will become the 16th state.
New Mexico has become the latest state.
A federal judge has struck down Oregon's same-sex marriage ban.
A federal judge in Pennsylvania. And starting today, same-sex couples in Illinois can legally marry.
The United States Supreme Court here in Washington has now decided not to hear appeals on same-sex marriage.
The court's order immediately ends delays on marriage in these states.
More than half of all Americans now live in a state where gay marriage is legal.
A federal judge has struck down North Carolina's gay marriage ban.
We're going to take you to Alaska now.
Now legal in the state of Idaho.
Wyoming is the latest state.
In Montana.
South Carolina.
Same-sex marriage officially became legal in the Sunshine State at midnight.
A full-blown civil rights battle in Alabama.
Now 36 U.S. states and the District of Columbia currently allow gay marriages.
In a landmark decision, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that states cannot ban same-sex marriages.
Social judgment theory is inadequate when predicting or understanding how an uncommitted person may choose or lean toward a certain latitudinal stance. As we know, social judgment theory incorporates ego as a basis by which someone creates their anchor point. Non-committal people are non-committal due to the fact of having low ego involvement. We propose that there needs to be another stage that influences people's opinions and views when it comes to the non-committal stage. We call the stage social influence stage. This stage has two segments to it that will influence an uncommitted person into a certain stance.
The first part of social influence stage looks at context as opposed to ego involvement. If we apply this aspect to the changing stance of America since 1970 towards gay rights, marriage, we see a drastic shift in attitude. According to Statistia.com, less than 4% of all Americans identify as gay or lesbian. Since this statistic shows that not everyone in America is gay, we can conclude that not everyone has a strong ego attachment to this topic. However, a non-committed person on this matter may be persuaded into accepting homosexuality based off the cultural context. In this case, homosexuality in America is accepted. Likewise, a non-committed person in a different context, say Iraq, might be persuaded to reject the idea of homosexuality.
The second aspect of the social influence stage can be characterized by an individual's influence in relation to a non-committed stance. To elaborate on this idea, let's use an example.
I like Pavel. He's a really smart guy. I notice how he crossed his legs in a manner that I've never thought about before. I feel that I accept crossing my legs in this way now because Pavel is cool.
The rise of the social media and easy access to the information has affected influence on individuals significantly. When Pew Research Center began tracking social media adoption in 2005, just 5% of American adults used at least one of these platforms. By 2011, that share had risen to half of all Americans, and today 69% of the public uses some type of social media. Throughout the social media, individuals with non-committed attitudinal latitude can easily access the topic and be influenced to change their stance due to the video's credibility. Credibility doesn't include ego involvement and affects individuals' choices with peripheral cues. More importantly, peripheral cues such as credibility can change an anchor point of individuals with acceptance-rejection attitudinal stance. We're going to watch another example of how non-committed individuals can be influenced by masses.
Accessible hunting permits that are fairly easy to get, but in general, owning a gun in Russia at your house is illegal.
Loose gun control in the United States trickles into Mexico. The highest percentage of weapons in Mexico coming directly from the United States.
I guess yes, it's really hard to get a gun in France, I think. At least I don't know anyone who has a gun for other reason than hunt.
I'm from New Zealand, and no one really has a gun. Even the police on the street, they don't carry firearms. So even seeing a police officer with a firearm it's a little bit scary to me.
In the video, we saw that along with statistics, viewers were presented with an international viewpoint on the gun issue. People from different countries were sharing their national gun situation. Due to the credibility of the rest of the world, individuals with non-committal latitude are more likely to be persuaded to accept the idea of gun control. Individuals with an anchor point on the latitude of gun control rejection are less likely to be persuaded by the social opinion of masses. However, the chance of changing the anchor point is possible.
So, how does this all tie together? Let's review. Sharif created social judgment theory in the 1960s. With his theory, he established that human beings all have latitudes of judgment. These latitudes are structured within 3 different ranges. In the center is a non-committed judgment. This simply means that someone does not have an opinion towards a particular stance. On the either side of the non-committed stage lies the latitude of acceptance and the latitude of rejection. This means that a person will place their anchor point coinciding with an appropriate latitude that fits them. Social judgment theory argues that a person will place their anchor point depending on how the issue resonates with their ego. The closer the issue is to the person's life, the more likely they are to cast their anchor point in the acceptance or rejection's latitude.
As an objective theory, social judgment theory does well to predict an individual's latitude but falls short in 2 areas. The 2 areas can be classified by an added stage or notion called social influence stage. This extends and helps the theory predict how an uncommitted person may create an anchor point. As we watched examples of cultural and personal influences towards individuals, we can come to the conclusion that social judgment theory is lacking a stage that would recognize social effects on people who has no particular opinion on the topic. One of the biggest gaps in the theory is represented by the notion that the change of standpoints could be influenced by society and culture. Both can easily affect the perspective of an uncommitted person and make other individuals affirm to the public opinion, even if they have a contrary standpoint. Such peripheral cues as credibility, gun control example, and likeness, Pavel example, can also influence individuals' standpoints.
In other words, social influence stage takes ego away from a person's decision and looks at two separate ways that that person can be influenced.
Influence through context and media.
Influence through individual involvement.
Thank you for listening to our Communications Extension Theory. Sincerely yours, Communications Theorist Pavel Klementyev
and Jonathan Carlisle.